Welcome to the Expansive CEO podcast. I'm your host, Hannah Chapman, founder of Expansive CEO and X Squared Wealth Planning. Buckle in as we explore how to create true prosperity and build a business and a life that expands beyond yourself and makes a dent in the universe. Welcome to the Expansive CEO podcast. I'm your host, Hannah Chapman, and today my guest is a repeat, which is always one of my favorite things. I love getting to continue the conversation with people I find endlessly fascinating. And so today we have back Jason Hernstad, who is a coach, a mentor, and strategist for business owners and conscious entrepreneurs. And he works with those entrepreneurs and business owners to really move through their fears, avoid burnout, and so they can re-experience the passion and purpose of their business and lives. And if you want to go back and listen to our previous episode that we recorded together, it's episode 143. It was back in December of 2024, and it was called The Power of Attachment in Business, Relationships, and Personal Growth. Jason, hi, thank you for being here again. It's so good to see you.
Hey Hannah, it's always good to see you too.
So we have, we spent like half an hour talking before we started recording, which is always a mistake. We should always hit record.
Because there's good
Right.
some good stuff in there.
There's so much good stuff in there. But what I wanted to talk about and what we're both kind of experiencing at the same time,
Mm,
being business owners, both having been in business for a long time, different ventures and venues, we're both in kind of a launch phase
mhm,
with new things coming up. And so I love this topic of, one, not necessarily reinvention, but like reinvigoration, like what's new, what's coming up, but also like this process, like what is the process that we've both been going through? Completely separate things. We're not doing a collaboration or anything, but it's just interesting that we've both been going through this at the same time, launching, creating new offers, um, honing things, honing messaging.
mhm.
And how do we do that, stay excited, um, get all that stuff done, and really stay present and stay grounded and move through a lot of the, just like in your intro, we said, when fears come up, when doubts come up, when challenges come up, how do we continue to move through that?
Mm.
Um, and how do we guide? Because this, for both of us, this is also something we guide people through who are
Yeah,
going through it. And we're experiencing it now. So we've got kind of like a meta conversation going on, right? So yeah,
to-
let's go.
totally. Yeah, well, there's something about being, you know, congruent in the things that we do, right? The things that we support others through. Like we can only really truly take people through things that we have thresholds we have faced ourselves. Um, and and yeah, I mean, new whenever we're going for a new level or a next iteration of ourselves, it's pretty likely that we're going to experience a lot of those difficulties or pains or emotional setbacks or the fears and the blocks that come up when you're expanding and putting yourself out there in a new way or again, there's a lot that comes up when that's why business and entrepreneurship is like a very practical spiritual journey.
Mm-hmm.
Because the world of personal growth is so much about that. It's about growth. It's about being outside of your comfort zone. It's about experiencing new things and doing new things and really experiencing more of the brilliance and beauty that we all are because we've put ourselves in such limited boxes and perceiving ourselves in certain ways that, oh, I'm this thing or I am this label or I do this thing. And we can be so fixed in our identity in that way. But to really experience the truth of who we are is to go outside of those things and to be in the awe and the wonder. This is not to say like we have these overinflated egos about what we think we are, but to truly be in awe of um, the journey of life and that we can show ourselves that we can expand and do new things. And yes, we've both been in these. It's kind of interesting because the I really appreciate the Taoist philosophy, which is so based on the rhythms of nature. Like that whole lineage in philosophy was really based on the observation of how nature works. And there's a lot of the kind of using the analogy of like a deciduous tree as the experience of the seasons and the experience of how we experience our energy as humans if you live in a four season environment. And so if you think about it, the tree sheds its leaves in the fall and all the energy goes into the trunk and into the roots to build and fortify and to create new things. And then in the spring it starts emerging with new stuff. And I just find that really beautiful and kind of poetic of where we both are. We've been cultivating and growing and germinating a new thing. Therefore, and then leading into the spring, now it's almost the end of February that now we get to start expanding and spreading and pushing that out. Is the wood element is the season that we're coming into where things start to grow. Um, so yeah, I think we were talking about how do we continue to move beyond those fears and limitations that inevitably come up. And there's so many ways. There's so many ways and there's so many tools, and that's a beautiful thing about this time, but sometimes that can be a little overwhelming too. Like where do we turn for these things? Um, I think there's a lot of angles and there's multiple things to take into account for each one of us. Like we can't forget that we're not just so many of us are very oriented to the mind and
Hmm.
oriented to cognitive perception as being the primary lens through which we look at life and ideas. Um, but we're very much an animal as well, and we if we can tend to the basics of what the human being needs in terms of the body, in terms of the community and things like this, and make sure that we're healthy on all these levels, that really supports to fortify us taking steps in new directions. So I kind of think of it from, are we getting our baseline needs met in terms of are we taking care of our food and our sleep and our nutrition and then part of that, what I include in that too, is your social needs. We all have a need to be supported and to feel
Hmm.
connected. And so when we do those things, it kind of provides a baseline. And then as we're gearing up to grow through new levels, inevitably we're going to stretch ourselves and we're going to hit some sort of boundary or limitation or just a perceived limitation. But there's a mental and emotional component tied into those things. And the oftentimes we'll find like let's take say for example, okay, putting myself out there and doing this new launch or launching this new product or this new business is somehow scary in some way. There's a fear that comes up. Well, if we really go into that and drill down deeper and deeper and deeper, we'll find at some point in time we didn't extend ourselves into some new area because we had a perception, we had a fear that was telling us like if I go do that action, if I go do this thing, if I step out in a certain way, something bad or scary is going to happen. And this is not it's not logical and it's usually not conscious
Hmm.
because the emotional brain is just that. It's actually underneath the logical brain. There's like this I think it's Dan Siegel who did this diagram if anybody's watching what we're doing instead of just listening, but I'll explain. I'm holding up my hand and I have my thumb curled under the rest of my fingers, and this is an informal diagram of the brain. And so my forearm represents the brain stem. This is the very instinctual reptilian brain. And then the fingers represent the neocortex, which is the most recently evolved part of the brain, which is where higher thinking and personality and language all exists. And if you lift the fingers and you reveal the thumb, this is the subcortical part of the brain. This is where the emotional brain lives. And so what's really happening is that the emotional brain, the things that are stored in the emotional brain are informing the neocortex, which is where all the thinking is coming from. So we can't think our way through moving past the fears because fear is an emotion. It's not a rational piece. But what we can do is we can use the stories and the meaning making of the forebrain, the neocortex, to really start diving in and drilling deeper and deeper and deeper and seeing what is that core emotional piece, which is if I go take this action, something bad or scary is going to happen. And then we can work with it at that level. Like once we can identify, like if I expose my, let's take an example. Like if I go publicly expose what I believe deeply, I'll be ostracized or I'll be like shunned or dismissed or in these days like canceled, right? And so that there's a real fear that lives there. And so there's beautiful work that's come out of the world of neuroscience is really blending its way into therapy. And I mean, it has been for a while. But what's so beautiful is we can actually look at a process that underpins a lot of therapeutic processes that makes them effective. And that's this is when we go into that emotional aspect, we can identify that statement of if I do this, something bad or scary will happen and make that authentic to what I'm experiencing. If I launch my brand, that's a personal brand, I'm scared that I won't be accepted by my peers, or I'm scared that I'll be kicked out of my community for my beliefs, whatever it is. We got to be with that experience and actually feel the activation of that fear. It's actually really important that we feel a sense of being activated in it. And
Mhm.
then from the work of Bruce Ecker did really great work on this, which is uh, he co-developed coherence therapy, which is underpinned by the neuroscience of memory reconsolidation, which are just fancy terms for how this actual healing process works. We go into the emotional experience, we feel the activation, we feel the fear of it, we get really acquainted with it, get curious and understand like where at what point in our lives was this part of us born. It's usually quite a young part. Like we can trace it back and intuitively know that's 7 years old or 4 years old. And then what we do is we actually look for mismatched experiences, either in our own experience or in others. Like think about a time when either you or someone else has done something like that, has exposed themselves in a new way, and not been ostracized. And what happens is we actually bring that experience to mind while we're in this activated state. And we start to kind of swing back and forth, and we go into the experience of that action being taken without the negative repercussion. And then we kind of go back into the experience of the emotional knowing that we have of this action's gonna, if I take this action, this negative, bad, or scary thing is gonna happen. And as you go back and forth between those things, this really beautiful thing happens in the brain, which is the neural network that stored the emotion with those thoughts and events starts to open, it starts to release the emotion, and then the network will actually reform itself over the next 4 to 5 hours. And what will happen is the emotional content will be discharged, will have been removed. And so that actually is that what I've found with clients is actually we do that process and then they go on and take the action that was paralyzingly scary before, but that emotional piece has been released, that has been discharged, and then you can actually go on and take the action effortlessly because there's no emotional unconscious block. So I know I said a
Yeah.
lot of stuff there.
Yeah. Well, okay, so I wanted to share, like, I love that we're talking about this literally right now, because I I experience things like this, on my own in my own life, and literally last night and this morning was
Mm,
having an instance of this coming up, this um, feeling unsupported,
mm-hmm,
feeling unsupported by family in
mm,
in particular in launching um just launching my business is
mm,
like years ago, and like many years ago, right? So like from 18 years ago till now, right? This feeling of there was a trigger that triggered this to come up, but it ended up with, like when I sat with it, I'm like, oh, why am I feeling? Because I was feeling, especially last night, I was feeling like just in kind of a foul mood, which is not typical for me.
yeah, sure.
Um, and like I knew I was not feeling great about something, but I couldn't quite pinpoint it. I thought it was the trigger that was pulling it up. And then as I like before I fell asleep, as I was laying down, I felt it. Like it was a resentment. It was a
Uh,
resentment that came up of feeling like I wasn't supported by my wider family network in
mm,
launching my business.
hmm
And today, I was like, okay, there you were. I see you.
hmm
Today, my husband and I went and got coffee. We dropped our kids off at school. Every once in a while, we'll drop them off together and then we'll go get coffee if we don't have anything else going on in the morning. Um, and so we're sitting there talking about it, talking about the thing. We're like, we're about to make a big move, right? So as you're like, big things are happening with our family. We're about to make a big move. We're going back to Arizona, where all of our extended family lives. Almost like 95% of them
Oh,
live in the
wow.
Phoenix area. And so this was triggering pretty hard, right? And then also, like we're saying, like I've got new things launching, more visibility, like next step visibility coming up soon and in different ways. And in sharing with him, my husband and I have been really practicing this for at least the last year and a half, like just really being able to be open, be seen with, what's truly coming up. So I started sharing that and it triggered tears. I started crying.
hmm
Um, and he still does a thing where he does want to like fix it first, or he wants to challenge it first, right? Like he's like, well, what about this? What about that? And like I okay, I'm feeling this right now. Like, and these are the memories that are coming up. This is what's triggering it. Like, this is how, like, but what you're saying too. So when I give myself, I know that. I know I need to feel it. I know I need to allow myself to like go through the emotional response, which um I've mentioned this many times, but if you haven't read My Stroke of Insight by Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor, fantastic. I'm going to recommend it again. I need to have a
Yeah,
recommended books list, by the way. Just
totally. Yeah,
have it
yeah.
on there. One of the things that she says in there is that our emotional response, like the actual physiological response, is about 90 seconds of,
Sure.
cortisol or whatever like whatever you're feeling is like it's going to move through in about 90 seconds if you allow yourself to feel it. When you
Yeah.
interrupt that pattern, that's what you keep going back to it, keep going back to it because you're not letting yourself fully experience the emotion. Um, and so once I had done that and Adam was able to like kind of just listen and let me kind of like muse, not vent, but like say what was coming up and all these different places where I felt unsupported. I did exactly what you did, what you were talking about, where like, well, I have this person who were really supportive and who I've worked with and who were so appreciative, and then this person who I don't work with, but we've had really good conversations, and it, like that feels good. It feels supportive to me to be able to love on and help others in with my gifts.
hmm
Like that feels really special to me. Like even
Hmm.
if you don't want to, you're not going to like be a financial planning client or a coaching client, but like we can have a deep conversation about it. Like that feels really good to me.
hmm
And there's like so those pieces of like, okay, yeah, there have been people in my life that are like, no, we're not going to talk about that. We're just going to like
Sweep it
shut
under the rug.
right. And that so like I can comfort myself and love myself through the fact that, hey, you know what, that kind of hurts. It doesn't feel good. And I can also give myself the memory of and remind myself of like, here are the places where people like, yes, here are your champions.
hmm
And my husband gets to remind me too is that, how proud he is of me, how much he is a champion for me, like all of that. And like, yeah, you're right. You're right. And that bolsters like, okay, we're like healing that trigger that I
hmm
didn't know was quite so raw still when it came up.
hmm Totally. Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing all that, Hannah. It's nice to also like know more of your world personally. And God bless all the guys, and we've all done it as like all the men listening, like we try to fix, Um, and case in point, and Hannah's sharing is that what the ladies need in that moment is just to be heard and listened to and held space for and just be present with. They don't want fixing. In fact, that doesn't make it better.
Mhm.
Um, I
It
think
interrupts the emotional response, actually.
uh-huh, right, yeah, exactly, because we're coming in with logic and it's like there what's that? There was like this video meme that was that was making its way through Instagram recently, like it's not about the nail, did you see this?
It's so good.
It's
Yeah,
right.
describe it.
So I mean, it's been a minute, but like for the viewers that haven't seen this, basically, it's a couple, and the woman has like a nail, literally a nail in her forehead, like a hat, like construction nail in her forehead, and and every time, and she's explaining it to her partner or her husband, and he's just trying to fit. He's like, but you have a nail in your. He's like using like the logic and reason, and then it ends with him saying something to the effect of like, "Gosh, I get that. That must be hard." And she's like, "Yes, it is." Yeah. But like that's the point, right? It's kind of how obvious it is of like how men and women, or the masculine and feminine, um, have trouble sometimes with that, and I think there's an important maturation for men to go through in order to know how to hold that and just be with the process. And that really comes down to men being able to be with their own emotional process. Because when we can integrate and be with our feminine aspects and be able to allow ourselves to have our emotional experience, then we know that's okay. What we need is just to be present with this thing that's coming up. Um, and then yeah, love what you shared because there's very much um, an inherent process that if we allow, you're right, seconds to minutes, right? Seconds to minutes, emotions move through. Um, and then, so absolutely, that's such a critical piece just to allow the emotional experience. If we can find it in that experience, if we have just a certain amount of activation, like let's put it on like a 10-point scale, right? Which is subjective, but we can all give our subjective like assessment of where am I of one being I'm totally calm and 10 being I am like completely dysregulated. I'm in a like on the border of a panic attack. Um, if we're somewhere within our like lower range, like mid to lower range, not lower range, but maybe like between a 4 and a 7 in terms of activation, when we're in that amount of activation, like there's some regulation still with us but there's an amount of activation present, like we're present with an emotional experience, that is the ideal place to actually start to look for that mismatch experience to actually
Mhm.
shift and release that block because it could be a recurrent thing, right? Where we come up against the emotion over and over and we process the emotion to bring us down to regulation. That's one aspect. That's one way of like being with the emotion and then regulating it. But what I'm referring to is we can actually unwire that emotional response. So when we're in that kind of 4 to 7 level of activation, there is activation, we're not totally regulated. Then from that place, if we can identify what the core words are that encompass that emotional experience of I'm just gonna guess what it was for you. I won't say that this is what I think it is because to do it justice, to do it properly it would be honoring to take the time with you to go deeper into it and see what is that thing. But maybe it's something like um go like launching a business or doing this thing in this way is not safe because I'll be rejected by my family or like you said unsupported. But if we did a session together and we drilled down to that piece and we had you feeling that experience, then when we did that, we would look for when you're in that experience of like if I do this action, I'm going to be rejected by my family, which means, in some ways could feel like death, the threat of death. Then we'll actually, in that moment, we'll actually take you over and look for that mismatched experience of think about a time when you did launch something or do something new and you were supported by your family. And if that's not accessible, then we'll look for an example outside of you, like a friend of yours who done something and was supported. And as you do that, as you go back and forth with that experience, the brain is actually having this whole rewiring experience, which is wild.
Mhm.
And so yes, I'm this is not to say that I think that any of what you did with Adam was incorrect. It's total like I think that's a beautiful thing because most of us will absolutely do that thing where we have all these protections against feeling emotion because emotion was not allowed.
Right.
It's not very encouraged in our culture, and we have all kinds of protection that keeps us from feeling emotions that we just kind of like buffer against, we don't feel them, that's certainly not going to help anything. Even though in the moment we think we're keeping ourselves safe by not feeling the emotion, what I'm sharing and what I'm advocating for, and so are you here, Hannah, is that we've got to evolve and grow emotionally. Like
Yes.
we have to become more emotionally literate and allow the emotions to move because if we don't, they're going to be stored somewhere in our body mind and they're going to come out sideways, either through through bad behavior and ruining relationships, or it's going to ruin our health.
Hmm.
Like I just see it, we've seen it so many times. Um, so I really like I admire you for like leaning in and processing it and having a partner who is, you know, you've built a secure base with that you can do that with and continuing to have the courage to actually go in and feel and face those things so that they don't stop you.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, I mean, the other example that was coming up as you were talking before was, for me, something that I knew was scary was uh not even it wasn't a pivot, it was an expansion of including human design and gene keys in my like
Mm-hmm.
front facing offerings, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
that was almost 2 years ago now, year a good at least a year and a half. Yeah, it was a year and a half ago, but like for the full like 6 months before that, I knew what I needed to do and I was scared.
Yeah.
Right. And so that that piece, like it was like, I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to do it. That was the block. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Right. It was just like, nope, I don't know how to do this. I know I need to, but I don't know how. Like
Uh,
that was coming up for months and months and months until, I had that breakthrough of like, okay, this is how I'm going to do it.
Beautiful.
Um, and so that was in like July, August of 2023, really. When I like made this like conscious, visible push, or lean in, and not even a push, just like just an opening. Like this is what I'm already doing. This is who I already am, who I've already become. And
Mm-hmm.
now I'm letting everyone know about it. But there was all of those fears of I'll be rejected by my current clients, I'll be rejected by my profession, I'll be rejected by the people who are like more spiritual and think, like anything having to do with the stock market is evil, right? Like I
Mm-hmm.
felt like I was in this like potential danger zone
Yeah.
for sure, like in those months leading up.
Yeah. And it's so I mean, first of all, I like am so proud of your courage to step forward and do that because gene keys and human design are such powerful tools that are so supportive and it's authentic to you. And it's so wild because the experience is that I'm hearing you share is that this fear is showing up in all these ways and for all this time is like creating this experience of like, oh, I don't know how to do this
Yeah.
and all these different ways of blocking it where, you know, it's not rational, it's not logical, it's just a fear. And if we can get into it, if we can actually dive in and know the steps to take with ourselves to go into the fear, really go into like into the core of it, which takes a little bit of digging sometimes, you know, we got to kind of dig around and be like, well, what is the actual thing? Like, is it the actual fear of no, if it it's not the technical pieces because you knew the technical pieces. It's like, no, I'm afraid that I'm going to be, shunned by my communities or not accepted or whatever it is. We go into that piece, and if we can if we can roll past these things quicker, we can make more progress faster
Yeah.
in our business, in our personal lives, in any domain in which we're trying to achieve something, but we're for some reason either not taking the action, we if we can drill into like what is that emotional block, then it's such an elegant thing because we can uncouple it from the actual actions, we can release that emotional block, and then we can actually move forward and take the action. And I personally find that to be one of the most beautiful and satisfying things to support another human being through that journey because
Hmm.
we all have it and it makes such a big difference to our lives because it's aligning the unconscious script with the conscious desires of what we want in our lives. And if that gap is big and keeps getting bigger, or there's big gaps, let's say in like in your financial or your personal or your business or your relationships or your community or your health, whatever it is, you can go in and kind of and make sure that the unconscious is aligned with what the conscious desires are, and then boom, unstoppable. Take all the action you need. Your results are inevitable.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I that resonates so strongly for me. And I'm curious if you kind of have a similar patterning to me. What for me, the thing that usually stops action for me is some form of that unsupported. What's below that? I'm abandoned. I'm
Mm-hmm.
all alone, right?
Yeah.
Like that's the like that pretty much always is the core wound for me. I'm alone.
Mm-hmm.
I'm isolated.
Mm-hmm.
Um, which is also like super interesting after, that was already a known quantity for me that was what my spiraling tends to go into is I'm going to be all alone. Everyone will leave me.
Mm-hmm.
I'll be isolated, shunned, whatever it is. And my core wound, so in my gene key profile, my core wound is isolation.
Mm.
And when I read that, I was like, holy shit, like that's, of course it is. Of course it is for me. Like it
Yeah.
resonated so strongly. Reading that about myself and understanding those aspects. And so, what does that mean from a gene keys perspective? My core wound of isolation, right?
Mm-hmm.
All of the ways that I isolate myself, that I fear isolation, and that I also in turn isolate myself um when I'm feeling afraid of taking a step forward or saying something that I need to say or whatever that is.
Mm-hmm.
When I heal that every time that I dive in, like you're saying, um and allow myself to feel it, allow myself to heal another piece of that isolation wound, that is what I am also here to help others
Mm.
heal through, right? That's
Mm-hmm.
our core wound. We heal it, and then we also help others in that same way.
Mm. Yep.
A- And in like an even like more like spiritual sense, like even just you healing, when you heal you, that heals a part of the collective.
100%.
So
100%.
what if you're willing to share, do you have,
Sure.
just so other people can hear, maybe be like reflected as well, do you
Mm-hmm.
have a similar pattern? Like does it kind of spiral into the a similar bucket when things come up?
Yeah. Um, well, I'm happy to share. And just to respond to what you just said, that we're inextricably connected. Consciousness is not separate. It's one consciousness. And so each of us liberating whatever we're liberating inside of ourselves in terms of pains or traumas or fears or blocks or whatever it is absolutely making an impact in the collective. A lot of the traditions actually will say like the most important work that anyone can do is to realize themselves as true divine essence, as God nature, right? Because that has a massive ripple. Um, and in terms of personal content for me, like the way that it shows up, let's see, there's an experience of vulnerability of being exposed and being exposed uh, leading to being kind of ostracized or targeted,
Mm,
that it's not safe for me to expose my truest self, for fear that that not only won't be accepted but will be persecuted.
yeah.
And so it very much, and as I'm sharing it, like I can feel that kind of rippling through my body. I can feel it through my awareness. Like I've worked on this piece so much that I can say it and not be totally dysregulated when I say that. But there's still remnants of it there. And for some of us, I think like the exposure, fear of like exposure is really like yeah, it's a fear of persecution and like a fear of like being targeted and having like a painful, it lives like death in my nervous system. It lives like being killed in the nervous system, which is, you know, and I think it seems like we're kind of moving out of it as a culture, which I think is beautiful, but cancel culture was so detrimental. And I've had a lot of friends who have like, they're playing a big enough game to be exposed to enough people to be targeted and canceled.
Mm,
And they're good people and they're doing courageous things and they're doing good work and they're having like it's not even a question of them having a net positive impact on the world. Nobody's perfect, but that experience is kind of how it lives in my system. So for me, there's been like a fear of exposure, because in in my like the environments that I grew up around and like the lineage that I come from, it all feels like it's a fear of persecution and death. And so, yeah, that's about it. That's like the deepest one for me. I mean, there's actually other layers of like a fear of disconnection or a fear of not being loved. But I've put this kind of on the developmental needs arc. If like the latest one that comes up in life is if I don't do this perfectly, I won't be loved. Or like I have to perform perfectly in order to be loved. Like those pieces those have been softened quite a bit for me. And then as I go deeper and deeper and deeper, it's really like that's the piece that comes up for me is like the fear of exposure feels like a exposing myself to being persecuted, which is painful. Um, but yeah, I mean, still like it's still if that's the piece that's there that's keeping me from um, matching my conscious desires of what I want in my life and getting the unconscious script and the unconscious mind on board with it, I will do whatever it takes to move through that and to address that so that my life does become my external reality becomes exactly what I believe that it can be in my mind. And so yeah, that's where I land on that whole piece.
yeah, I love that. And I love to give, like for our listeners, for them to actually to like hear that and again see themselves reflected because I'm like the isolation wound isn't the only one,
Yeah.
right? So if I speak to that and a lot of people resonate with that, but yours being different, like I think that creates a really beautiful tapestry of like, hey, like really powerful um examples of exact and also what you said of like the layers of that, right? Not being loved, all of those like that those layers are on top of abandonment as well,
Mm-hmm.
right? So like we have these different channels and it's going down to a little bit nuanced difference. but we experience on a human level and a human experience, we experience the fear of not being loved, the fear of being rejected, the fear of um you know, being laughed off of a stage or booed off of a stage, right? Like those fears, like that's what keeps a lot of people from, like we're saying, from speaking on stage, from being visible, from expressing their truest self.
Hmm.
And when we move through that, like you're saying, like okay, if it's a fear of speaking, that fear of visibility is
Hmm.
so strong for a lot of people, right? Like public speaking being the most terrifying thing, even more so than death for most people, right? Like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
once you move through that, you can see how like comical it is. Really, like really, you're more afraid of that than like dying. Um, but when you're in it, you can't
Yeah.
see past it.
No, no, not at all. That's the nature of an emotional of the emotional experience. It actually shuts down the blood flow to the front of the brain and rational, reasonable thinking. It's the fear, and the nervous system gets activated into the sympathetic, and the blood chemistry changes. Like the hormone profile of what that's going through the blood is is absolutely different when we're in a stress response. And there's a biochemical phenomenon that's happening that is rooted in the experience of the emotional knowing in the brain. And and yeah, you can't see past it in that moment. But when you do get past it, when you can actually know how to navigate through that and actually clear the emotional piece, then no longer is it a hindrance, no longer is it a block, and you can actually go out and do the thing. And so if anybody's for anyone listening or watching, if anyone's listening, if anyone's curious about the actual underlying resources I'm talking about the work of Dr. Bruce Ecker. He wrote an incredible book called Unlocking the Emotional Brain. He he developed the the process of what's called memory reconsolidation, which is essentially what the title of his book actually says. It's unlocking the emotional brain. And he also co-developed coherence therapy, which is something that I'm studying and I've done a lot of coursework on. And I find that this is just it's like it is a if there ever was like a hack, like a shortcut of doing something, some sort of process that can uh, shortcut the amount of time that we would spend, circling around a thought or an idea or a block. That would be it. Like I've been exposed to a lot of things in the world of personal and spiritual development, and I've found that that is an extremely powerful and very elegant tool that I'm really grateful that we have access to these days, and I'm super incredibly grateful for Bruce Ecker and the work that he's done because now we have it. Now we have access to this stuff, and it's making significant change for people. I have a friend who's a coach and a therapist, and did he had a client who was experiencing debilitating anxiety from multiple adverse life events, who basically 80% of the time was in an anxious stress response. He did one session with him and got down to like the root, and the client reported a 30% permanent shift, 30% reduction just from one session. And so it's really powerful, and we have access to these tools, and it's a really beautiful thing. And thank goodness, right?
Yeah. Well, I want to be mindful of our time. Literally, we could talk for another 3 hours.
I know. We're gonna have to do this again.
Right. One of these days we'll have like just an uh no limits conversation. I would love that actually.
I would love that too. Yeah, let's book something in which we can do a Rogan style length podcast, right? Where we just go
Yes.
for a few hours.
Yes, I would absolutely love that. But since we can't do that right this moment,
Yeah.
I would love for you to share for just a moment about what, you know, give yourself the experience of being a little bit visible in what's coming up and what you would love to share and for people to know what's coming up.
Yeah, totally. Thank you, Hannah. Well, the coaching that I've done that I've trained in for over a dozen years and that I've done has largely been offline. And so now I'm in the process of doing that vulnerable thing and exposing myself and putting together the whole brand launch. So in the coming months, in the next 3 to 4 months, it's going to be all of that will be revealed and presented online. It'll be posted on in the social platforms. You have my social handles that you can post, and through my website. And that's yeah, it's a big one for me because there's so many topics that I love to teach upon. And now I'm actually going to do the thing of building the platform to teach these things. I'll be doing a limited opening for one-on-one coaching. And that's, it's a process of finding the right fit my clients have to feel that I'm a good fit for them, and I have to feel that they're a good fit for me too. And so I'll be doing a limited opening of some one-to-one slots. And then later on this year, I'm only looking for the next 3, 4 months on this launch. And that's really the purpose of it is actually put to put myself out there in all the platforms and have a web presence of this is who I am, this is what I'm about. And you and I have talked about there's another business and brand that I have a partner in that we're launching as well. But the main piece that I'm sharing, I'll be sharing through all my personal site, jasonhernstad.com, and then all my social profiles, Facebook, Instagram, and we'll see if I venture into the other ones, we'll see. But
Well, I am so excited for you and for this new phase of visibility. And yes, we will absolutely do another time because we didn't even touch on all, like we talked about so much stuff before we started recording. It's always such a mistake. Just
yeah, we did.
just hit record so that we could go on any of those topics, right? But thank you so much for being here, spending this time with me again. And if
Pleasure.
if anyone has questions, if you want to hear more, you know where to find me, Hannah at expansiveceo.com. And you can find all of Jason's information down in the show notes with all of his links. So thank you, Jason. It's great to see you again.
Likewise, Hannah, thank you so much. We'll talk soon.
That's it for this episode. Thanks for listening, and be sure to like and subscribe. And again, if anything resonated with you from this episode, I would love to hear from you. Email me at Hannah, HANNAH, at expansiveceo.com and tell me about it. And if you're ready for your greatest expansion, you can find ways to work with me at expansiveceo.com and at x2wealthplanning.com. That's X, the numeral 2, wealthplanning.com. So until next time, remember that there is enough, you are enough, and your birthright in this lifetime is to be expansive.